All right, so today we're diving into something pretty wild. Like, what if aliens are using, I don't know, psychic energy to talk to us?
Oh, it's a fascinating idea. And, you've gathered a really broad range of sources here. We've got the Reddit forums like RLV426, Our Paranormal, and even things like Talkalian.com, the Jim Harold Paranormal Podcast. Then we're even looking at Wikipedia, the NIH.
MIT Reader, and even Sky at Night magazine. So we're going from, like, hardcore science to some pretty out there stuff.
Yeah, exactly. A real spectrum.
So what we're trying to do here is explore, like, how do these sources talk about alien psychic communication? How does it work? What are the different viewpoints?
Yeah, and maybe even the why. Why would they do that?
Right, exactly.
So why don't we start with Reddit? I mean, it's always a good place to dive into, what people are actually thinking about. And RLV426, which is, the Alien franchise subreddit
For the alien movies.
for the Alien movies. That's right. And what's interesting there is you have these two camps. You have the people who love the idea of psionics. And psionics, just to be clear, is like mental abilities, telepathy, and that kind of.
Mind control, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they're like, oh, that explains how the aliens communicate.
Right, and it adds this really cool layer of mystery to these creatures, right? Something we just can't fully grasp.
Totally. And then there's, like, I remember in the Aliens Outbreak comics, there's that whole thing about the Queen, like, giving people nightmares and stuff.
Precisely. And so that's like leaning into the more fantastical side. But then you have these other fans who are like, no, 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 I want a more scientific explanation. So they'll talk about things like pheromones, which are chemical signals,
Right, like ants use.
like ants use,
Yeah.
exactly, or infrasound, these super low frequency sounds we can't even hear, but maybe they can. There's even a mention of a low hum in the Dangerous Prey short story, one of the alien
Oh,
stories.
really? I
Yeah.
haven't read that one.
Yeah, check it out. So it's this tension between wanting that sense of wonder and also wanting to ground it in at least some plausible science, even for fictional creatures.
Sure. So what about the Queen specifically, though? Like, in the movies, is she is she supposed to be telepathic, or is that just a fan theory?
Yeah, that's a big debate in the fandom. Some fans say, yeah, there are these moments in the films that suggest she might have those abilities, but it's definitely more explicit in the expanded universe, like the comics, the games, the novels.
So maybe the filmmakers were kind of hinting at it, but they never fully went there.
Right, maybe it was just too out there for the big screen, But others say, no, it's just a really tight connection within the hive.
Like with ants, like we were saying.
Exactly, like a really sophisticated nonverbal cues that we just don't fully understand.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving on from, like, the fictional aliens to, like, thinking about how alien languages might work, there was this really interesting discussion on rail linguistics about that.
Yeah, this one really got me thinking. What they were saying was, imagine if aliens could just connect minds directly and share thoughts without needing words,
Mm.
right? It completely bypasses the need for language as we know it. No grammar, no syntax, just pure thought transfer.
So, like, instant understanding.
Yeah. And that raises some huge questions about how knowledge would be passed down, how cultures would evolve.
Yeah, like, would they even have separate cultures if they could just share thoughts like that?
Exactly. It really makes you reconsider what communication even means.
It does. So,
Yep.
on a slightly lighter note, the RHFY subreddit, the humanity
Yeah.
fuck one, they took a more, I guess, fictional approach to this, right?
Yeah, they had this great story about like, what if that initial telepathic contact wasn't all sunshine and roses?
Yeah, I read that one. Like, it wasn't just about understanding the information, it was about feeling all these raw emotions, being bombarded with thoughts.
Yeah, the sensory overload, being lost in someone else's mind, like, and that could be terrifying.
Definitely not the kind of first contact you'd want.
For sure. Now, neurodiversity had a really different perspective, a sort of refreshing open mindedness.
Yeah, I like that one. He was basically saying, hey, maybe some of these things we can't explain, like certain phenomena, maybe they do have these really unusual sources.
Right. And maybe it's aliens. It's about being open to the possibility that there are things beyond our current understanding, beyond what science can currently explain.
Which I think leads nicely into our paranormal and the whole X-Files world, where aliens and paranormal stuff are often linked.
Absolutely. And there's this idea that what we think of as ghosts or spirits could actually be alien energy.
Like misinterpreting it.
Or that aliens might be projecting images, thoughts directly into our minds. It's this popular narrative that tries to connect the dots between all these unexplained events.
And there's that story on Our Paranormal Encounters about a see-through gray alien just, like, feeding away after the person prayed.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. That definitely suggests something beyond the physical, right?
For sure. And even the Relian RPG community, they're incorporating psychic abilities,
No.
telepathic hive minds into their games, even suggesting, like, a quantum physics basis for it.
Like there's some kind of quantum sensitivity that allows for this.
Yeah. It's cool how even in our games and stories, this concept of psychic connection really resonates. But then, Sturda Free Writing brought up the challenge of actually making alien telepathy believable.
Right, because how would it work on a practical level? How universal would these thought patterns be? Could you even detect them? These are the questions that science fiction writers have to wrestle with to make it convincing.
Okay, so that was Reddit. Lots to think about there. What about the more dedicated sites and podcasts? Like, what are they saying?
Well, Talkaline.com, which is connected to Nancy Dutertre, she's a researcher who's really into the intersection of psychic abilities and UFOs.
Okay.
And she suggests that, maybe telepathy, maybe even dreams are actual ways we're communicating with aliens right now.
Whoa. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. And then on the Jim Harold Paranormal podcast, there's Vincent Jenna, who claims he's in telepathic contact with what he calls an intergalactic council.
An intergalactic council.
Yeah. And it gets even weirder. He says it's made up of deceased aliens.
Deceased aliens.
That's a new one.
Yeah, like they're not physically here, but they're communicating telepathically. He even talks about where they come from, their intentions, and he claims they're showing up more because of humanity's self-destructive tendencies.
Well, like they're worried about us.
Exactly. And Wikipedia also links gray aliens to some occult beliefs, mentioning Aleister Crowley's entity, Lamb.
Oh, yeah, the whole lamb thing.
Right, so you see this theme of a non-physical mental connection popping up again and again.
Okay, so the idea is there, but what about the science behind this psychic energy? Like, what is it?
That's the thing, there's no real scientific definition. The surface writing folks, they had some fun with it, suggesting it could be a quantum wave, a product of consciousness.
Basically, nobody knows. Nobody knows. But the general idea is that it's the force behind mental communication, something aliens might be able to project.
Like sending out psychic waves or something.
Right. And there was that NIH study about human telepathy that showed activity in a specific part of the brain, the right parahippocampal gyrus, during a telepathic task.
Oh, so there's some evidence that our brains can do something like this.
Right. But of course, applying that to aliens light years away is a huge leap. And then MIT reader mentioned this fringe theory linking neutrinos, which are these tiny subatomic particles, to a human telepathic field.
Neutrinos.
Yeah, but it's not widely accepted and would require a massive amount of energy.
So not very likely.
Probably not. And our linguistics made a really good point that even if we could form the psychic link, understanding those alien thoughts would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, like even harder than translating their language.
Exactly, because we'd have no shared cultural context, no frame of reference for their thoughts.
So it wouldn't be like, oh, I understand you perfectly now. It would be more like, what are you even talking about?
Exactly, and that brings us to the more skeptical viewpoints.
Right, because not everyone buys into all this.
Of course not. And and Paranormal Encounters actually pointed out that a lot of reported paranormal experiences could be explained by things like sleep paralysis or even carbon monoxide poisoning.
Oh, like mistaking those for something supernatural.
Exactly. And Wikipedia highlighted how psychological factors like imagination, false memories can play a role in UFO beliefs.
So like our brains filling in the blanks.
Right. And Sky at Night magazine talked about sleep paralysis, explaining weird nighttime experiences.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we can't forget the lack of hard evidence. I mean, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they focus on technological signals, not psychic ones. And our own interstellar messages use things like binary code and simple pictures.
Like we're assuming they'll understand math and basic visuals.
Exactly. We're not sending out psychic messages. And Sky at Night pointed out that over 95% of UFO sightings have perfectly mundane explanations.
So most of it's probably not aliens.
Probably not. But it's fascinating to see this divide between personal beliefs and the scientific demand for proof.
It is, and these online communities are great for fostering these discussions. But it really highlights how important it is to be critical of what we read and hear.
Couldn't agree more. And this actually raises a final thought for our listeners. Given the vastness of the universe, the sheer number of stars and planets out there, could there be forms of communication we haven't even begun to imagine?
Like things we can't even conceive of right now.
Exactly. And what if, just what if, psychic connection is one of them?
That's something to think about. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.